So in here we should have the new Citizen Tsuyosa. That's Citizen's super popular sports watch with an integrated bracelet, and there have already been a couple of versions of this watch. There's the standard version, which looks a lot like a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, and then there was the far more elaborate sub-seconds version with a real textured dial. But both of those were the same size. I think it was about 40 millimeters. And now Citizen has decided to expand their selection with a new 37mm version, which I saw a couple of days ago and thought, yep, let's pull the trigger on this, see if this watch can fit me, because I thought the original Tsuyosa was pretty good. Today we'll take a first look at it. It might be the first video on YouTube about this watch. I'll leave a link to this in the video description, by the way, if you want to check it out for yourself. Now, I did purchase this with my own money. I think, was it $299, I think? I'll put the price I paid on screen anyway. Now, this one's only available in 3 colors at the moment, and they're all your typical unisex colors, except for perhaps this one, which is the green, or at least this is the color that looks most like more of the traditional men's watches. And yeah, it's definitely smaller. I think the area in which you notice it the most is actually the strap. It does go quite small there, but let's get some of these stickers off. And here's the code name of this particular watch, just for reference, NJ0200-50X. And below is the movement, which is the Miyota 821A, because Citizen owns Miyota. Now, this green is much more reserved than the previous watch I looked at. I'd expect other colors to probably follow, but for now, this was the obvious choice for me. And for the most part, the design looks absolutely identical, just downsized. I'll give you a quick close-up of this dial. So the listed specifications for this one are a stainless steel case, an anti-reflective sapphire crystal, although I can't say it's particularly anti-reflective. That does seem to be a weakness of this one. 50 meters of water resistance, and then that Miyota 8000 series automatic under the hood, which you should be able to see through the case rear. It's got that gilded finish, as you can see. Volume on this one isn't horrendous, but you can definitely still hear that rotor whirring. Case finishing on this model is reasonably good. For the money, it's definitely not industry leading. Some of the Chinese brands definitely have better case finishing than this, but it's certainly passable. Let's check the measurements. I think that's the most important thing with this one, because chances are you've probably seen the regular version of this watch before. It's exactly 37 millimeters wide. Lug to lug is tricky to measure. It has somewhat fixed end links, even though you can remove these, although you'll need like a custom strap to fit the gap. Including those sections, it's 46 millimeter lug to lug. The actual lug to lug is going to be much smaller than that, 41.9, but that's not really representative of how this one will probably fit. And then the thickness, what have we got there? Without the Cyclops, a hair under 12 mil. So it's still pretty chunky, although some of that's a side effect of the movement. It does still retain that date just like Cyclops there. I hold this exactly parallel with the camera. It seems reasonably well aligned, maybe a little bit high though on this particular unit. And the bracelet certainly has a steep taper to it. If this were a typical bracelet, it would be 20 mil tapering down to 16 millimeters. It's actually fairly typical of a watch of this style. Just looks a lot smaller compared to the standard version. Bracelet is all solid links like last time, and you can see there they're like these double solid links with push pin removal. So not the best, not quite as good as screw links, but not the worst either. Luckily with this particular one, you do get somewhat of a standard clasp. Again, it's only a pressed clasp, but unlike some other of these integrated bracelet watches, you do get some micro adjustment holes, in addition to the links being quite small. So you'll probably get a near perfect fit with this one. Now my wrist is 6¼ inches, so the last watch was definitely too big for me. Whereas this one looks almost perfect actually. Still a little bit thick for my taste. Certainly noticing less overhang compared to the previous editions of this watch. Now, I can't say I ever absolutely loved the original version of the Tsuyosa, but if they ever release that small seconds one in this size, that'll definitely be a keeper for me. What I do like is the fact that they've released it straight away in this size. A lot of these other brands, when they've released smaller versions of their integrated bracelet watches, they've often released them in considerably smaller sizes like 34 or 35 millimeters, which leaves quite the gap. Whereas this to me seems like a sensible step down. I mean, they may already have like a female targeting version that's even smaller, I can't remember, but 37 mil seems like a very good sweet spot for a lot of people. Here's a look at it on the wrist. It does have a bit of like that hovering effect. You can see some small gaps under the lugs there, and that's because the case back still protrudes quite a bit, and I'm sure some of that is movement prohibited basically. Overall, pretty good looking watch. Also has that at least somewhat recessed crown there. Now, I don't have the other one on hand to compare against, but from what I can remember, this amount of recession on the crown is closer to the small second Tsuyosa. So it's not quite as flush as the standard Tsuyosa, which is a little bit of a shame. And I also still think that the automatic text there is just oddly low. I mean, I'm sure they've tried to echo the position of the Citizen at the top center there, but for some reason it just doesn't look quite as proportionate on the bottom, maybe because it's in a smaller font. Overall, this does seem pretty decent though. I think maybe it is a candidate for a crystal swap. As you can see, it looks quite washed out, the dial, especially in this more subtle green compared to the super bright oranges and yellows that were popular with the original one. That crystal at certain angles, I mean, you can see how saturated it is here, but then when I tilt it back, it just gets a little bit murky because of that crystal. Oh, and we better do a lume test just in case it's been downgraded or something. To tell you the truth, I really can't remember how the first one performed, but with the UV on, it looks like the hands and the markers may have a slightly different compound. I'll probably have to look back at my old footage and really judge it in comparison. I'd say it's about average lume, nothing special, but not terrible either. So yeah, this one's linked below if you want to take a look at the other colours for yourself, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments. Do you think this one is going to be as popular as the original? I think the compactness may come in handy with this one, especially given how chunky the first one was.